Hi, this is Re-Gor, host of Then Is Now podcast and The East Meets the West. I just wanted to say thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers. We appreciate your support as we grow the audience for our shows. You could find our links to our Patreon page as well as our TeePublic page at havenpodcasts.com. With Patreon, you'll get a lot of exclusive stuff, including our monthly pop culture newsletter, cool gifts, discounts for TeePublic, and our special exclusive show, Then Is Now Filmmakers series, in which we interview directors, producers, writers, composers, special effects guys, basically anybody who works behind the scenes in film and television, and get their insights into the process of creating films and TV shows. Also at our TeePublic page, you'll find cool merch that you can get or even give to others as gifts. You can find those links at our website, or you can go directly to teepublic.com/stores/havenpodcasts and patreon.com/thenisnowpodcast. Enjoy!
Hi, this is Jerry Mathers from Leave It to Beaver, and this is the Then Is Now podcast.
What kind of a sick school is this?
Uh-oh, Dongo!
The plan. Strange things are afoot at the Circle K.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
You got spunk. I hate spunk.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger.
Oh, righty then.
How you doing? Back off, man. I'm a scientist.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Say hello to my little friend.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
What are you people? On dope?
Stop whining.
I got a crap on deck that can choke a donkey.
Who is your daddy?
I'm sorry, but all questions must be submitted in writing.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Can I do that?
I'll be back.
A dynamite!
Show me the money!
Don't!
Up your nose when you rub a hole.
A what?
I'm sailing! I'm sailing!
Groovy.
You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Love means never having to say you're sorry.
Here's looking at you, kid.
We got no food, we got no jobs, our pets' heads are falling off!
Come to the coast and get together, have a few laughs.
Hear that, Elizabeth? I'm coming to join you, honey!
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
I love it when a plan comes together.
What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to
11, exactly. One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
We're on a mission from God.
Hello and welcome to another wonderful episode of Then Is Now podcast. I am your host, Re-Gor. For those of us who grew up pretty much from the 1950s to the 1990s, newspapers carried ads for movies and listings for the theaters and drive-ins that were playing those movies. I used to love pouring through the movie section of the Boston Globe to see what was playing because my parents and I went to the movies once or twice a week. And in those days, movie posters, which is now basically a lost art, were boiled down to smaller versions to fit as ads in the paper. Aside from collecting TV guides and scanning them in from my Facebook TV Guide scan page, I also pour through old newspapers and collect scans of those old great newspaper ads that I was just talking about. Today's guest is a great guy who shares the same passion as me, except he's taken his love of those old ads one step further and publishes a fanzine called Drive-In Asylum, which you can get through Etsy. Each issue is chock full of those incredible newspaper ads, and I love when I get an issue and sit down with it to carefully go through it page by page, reading all the ads and articles. If you remember those ads, you might want to consider checking his magazine out, and those ads are definitely a lost art that you need to share with the younger generation. So get ready for a fun interview. Class is in session.
I have a bad feeling about this.
How could I possibly be expected to handle school on a day like this?
Hey, you in my class? I am today.
I think you should consider transferring to shop class. Now, very few students are severely injured in shop class.
Bueller.
When you were in school,
Bueller.
did you ever cut class?
Bueller. Yeah, I guess I did. Sure, most kids cut classes.
Good. Sign this. He's sick.
I get so lonely when I hear that third attendance bell ring and all my kids are not here.
7 years of college down the drain.
Fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life, son.
You lack discipline. As long as I'm here, there will be no grades or gold stars or demerits. We're gonna have recess all the time. Woo! Go, play, and have fun now.
Okay, folks, I've got a great guest for you today. He's the editor and publisher of the independent fanzine Drive-In Asylum, which is a quarterly print-only fanzine devoted to classic eras of horror, cult, and exploitation films. Now, exploitation is no stranger to the show, which we've talked about quite a bit. It showcases the art of newsprint ads as well as interviews with the people who made the films. His team of film fanatics also offer commentary and reviews in each issue. He's also the curator of Groovy Doom, a Facebook page dedicated to vintage newsprint ads for horror, cult, and exploitation films, as well as writing his Groovy Doom blog. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the show Bill Van Ryn.
Hey there, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad to have you on the show today, man.
Thanks for asking me to come on. I was very excited that you did.
Oh, yeah, it was awesome. And I got to tell the folks at home, the way I found you was we had both been at the April Ghoul's Drive-In Monsterama, which I did a show about, and I did a blog about as well. And there was a huge ad between the movies for your fanzine, Drive-In Asylum. And I as soon as I saw the ad, I literally put it into my phone and saved it for when I got home so I could look it up and start buying them because it's an amazing magazine. So, Bill, can you just tell us how you got onto the path to publishing this great magazine?
Well, thank you, first of all, for actually buying the magazine after you saw the ad, which was the whole reason I made it. I got into it by somebody showed me a fanzine called Snack Bar Confidential, and an artist named Lance Laurie publishes that fanzine. I'm not sure if he's still doing it because he doesn't market it quite the same way. Lance makes his and likes to leave it in laundromats and phone booths and places in public. Well, if there even are phone booths anymore. He leaves them in places in public for people to find. But I loved the design that he came up with because it was just all this vintage advertising collected into maybe like a 24-page fanzine. And seeing those ads back on paper really gave me a thrill. And I had already been collecting ads for my Facebook page, Groovy Doom, which people were really starting to pick up on. Like I was getting more and more followers because a lot of people love looking at them. And I thought, that's what I have to do. I have to do a fanzine like this. So I created, the first 2 or 3 issues of Drive-In Asylum were almost all advertising. It was just collages of vintage newsprint ads and for horror, cult, and exploitation films.
Nice.
I'm not interested in, comedies or family films.
Right.
At least for the ads. So that's how I started doing it. And then I started, of course, I can't keep my mouth closed for very long, so I started writing things in the fanzine, and other people started to want to get involved, which really surprised me. And I thought, wow, maybe this is something I should explore. So here we are today. The magazine is now about 60 pages per issue. There's a lot more ads and a lot more commentary in it.
Yeah, it's so good. I love when I get it. And I just can pour through it, and I read every ad, and it totally brings me back to those days, in the 70s and 80s. And, it's funny because I do research as well. A lot of times I do it if we're talking about a movie on the show, I'll go through old newspaper ads that I can find, through archives online. And do you have ads that you kept from when you were a kid, or is this more recent research?
This is all stuff that I found online, the thing in newspaper archives.
Okay, yeah, I use that one too.
But I did have a scrapbook of ads back in the day. I didn't know what it meant to put things in cheap photo albums where it's full of acid and it just burns all of your images to death. So everything turned brown and started to get real super brittle. And more importantly, sadly, I lost my nostalgia for it, and I just threw it away. And now I regret that.
Yeah.
Today.
Yeah, I still have photo albums full of stuff too.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think what happened was I had to downsize because I was moving, and stuff happens. But fortunately, I found another way to get this urge out. Once I started to miss looking at those ads, I started to collect all these images, and now I have thousands and thousands of these images, and putting them into the zine gives me something to do with them.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And so growing up, were you into, horror movies that were on TV or even horror hosts?
I was into everything that had to do with horror. I was a full-fledged monster kid. My dad used to show me horror movies on TV when I was real young. He showed me my first horror movie, which was Gargoyles,
Oh, nice.
the made-for-TV movie, and I was terrified, but I loved it. And my mother was furious when she found out, 'cause I think I was like 2
Oh, there
when
you
that
go.
movie came on
Yeah,
TV.
because that was 72. I was as well.
Yeah. So, it was either that or when they reran it the following year when I was 3. But I was very young and I loved it. I was hooked for life, and there was nothing anybody could do to stop it. I just started, as I grew up, that's the stuff I went straight for in the TV guide. Every week, I was like, get the TV guide the first day it's available. It was usually a Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then I would just go through it and I would plan my viewing for the week, just looking for the little tag after that said thriller.
Yep.
So that was how I got started. And and then I discovered Famous Monsters magazine,
Yep.
which really just exploded my fandom, just like everybody else who was young at that time.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are. I'm obsessed.
And that's so amazing because we're definitely kindred spirits because I had the exact same experience. And what's really, I got to tell you, the irony of your fanzine is amazing because when I saw the ad, and the name of it, of course, as we said, is Drive-In Asylum. Now, when I was 2 in 1972, also, I have a vivid memory, and I've told this story on the show before, but I have a vivid memory of going to the drive-in with my parents and seeing the movie Asylum with Peter Cushing and Herbert Lom. It was the
Oh,
Amicus
yeah.
anthology film. And
Hmm.
what's funny about that is a side note, my mother and I could never remember the name of the movie, so we always called it Chopping Heads for years afterwards. Which a buddy of mine said, "Oh, I'd love to see a movie starring Peter Cushing called Chopping Heads." But
I like that title better.
I
Yeah.
know. So I just thought it was great, and it was just, and the drive-in, of course, it was always a passion of mine, anyways, and I still talk about it to this day. I still go. I've been actually all through last year, 2020, when no theaters were open, the drive-ins were, and my family and I, we went to the drive-in like almost every week. And so to see a magazine called Drive-In Asylum, I know when I saw that ad, I wrote it down on my phone on a note so I would remember it, and I've been hooked ever since. It's just a weird kind of synchronicity there.
Speaking of Asylum, do you remember in 1979 when it came out again in theaters with a different name?
I know that it did, but I didn't actually get to go see it. What was the name?
It was called House of Crazies.
Oh, right. And did you get to
And
see
there
it?
was no, nobody took me to the movies to see stuff like that. Hardly ever. I had to really beg to get adults to take me to the movies to see horror films.
Wow.
But it was called House of Crazies, and there was a pretty big ad campaign. Because remember, in the 70s, they used to advertise those movies on television, like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when kids were watching TV.
Right.
And they were marketing to us, even though sometimes the movies were rated R, and we needed a parent to get in to see them, but they still wanted to sell us that stuff. Thank God.
Yeah.
Bless those people.
Exactly. Yeah, I was fortunate to have parents that loved horror movies anyway. So we went to most, like they took me to most of the horror movies. They didn't take me to Alien, and there were a few others that I would have liked to have seen. But
Oh, you're so lucky.
yeah,
You're so lucky.
Well, like
my dad liked horror films too, but he was just like too lazy to take me to the movies. He liked to watch stuff on TV.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, because I remember kids on the playground going, "Oh, I can't go see that movie. It's rated R." Rated R. I'm sorry, I'm from New England. I don't pronounce my R's. And and I
It's
was
in the
like,
yard, not too far from the car.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, "Oh, I just saw that last night with my folks," and they're like, "What? How did you see that?" I'm like, "Well, they took me to it."
Yeah, that's a big idea to get used to for some of us because our parents wouldn't do it.
The funny thing too, now that we talk about it, back in those days, my mother would cover my eyes through the sex scenes, but violence was okay, but sex was bad. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, well, theoretically the violence was fake, but that sex could have been real.
Right, right. So aside from the Snack Bar Confidential that you mentioned, were there other magazines? I mean, we did talk about, well, you mentioned Famous Monsters, I should say. Were you familiar at all with Michael Weldon's Psychotronic magazine?
That came along a little later for me. Like, I wasn't aware of that until maybe the very late 80s, the early 90s.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a whole lot to do with that magazine, no.
Okay, I was just curious because it's I don't want to say it's similar. It's just got the same vibe, except he just talks about older movies, cult B movies, grindhouse exploitation stuff. But he doesn't post many ads in them, if I can recall. But yeah, that was always one that I sort of gravitated to after Famous Monsters, and kind of filled that gap until I found your awesome fanzine. Which, I can't tell the folks at home enough. You've got to go out and get this fanzine. It's incredible. And how difficult is it because you do print only, right?
Yeah, it is strictly print only. I don't plan to ever make it available online because that sort of takes away the experience of it. I do plenty of things online that you can find. If you don't, for some reason, you don't want to buy the fanzine, there's the Facebook page, which is also beautiful to look at because if you just go to every Facebook page has a section where you can just go and look at the photos that have been posted. If you bring those up on a device, like an iPad or even your phone, and just start scrolling through those gorgeous black and white print images, I could do that all day. I think they're so beautiful to look at.
I agree. And that's the thing too, is that the art of movie posters is starting to be forgotten. Because now we have all these streaming services and they have to put all these little, rectangles of the movie so we can see a bunch of them at once. And 90% of them now are like the actors' faces. There's no actual art to the posters.
Yeah, the whole way that we sell movies has changed because the way that we consume movies has changed. So, I understand why it has worked out that way, but it makes me feel very nostalgic to see the newsprint ads because I enjoyed that way of film marketing much more than today's. Of course, we were a lot younger, and like we already said, it was sometimes difficult to get adults to take us to see these films. So sometimes the newspaper ad campaign and the TV spots, that was the experience of the film for us.
Right.
Because we couldn't just go on our own because we were kids. But the newspaper was something that you could get. I mean, almost everybody's family got a newspaper, or it was very easy to get a hold of one. You just looked through the news or the movie section of the newspaper, and all of these gorgeous images were there, like these lurid ads with monsters and dirty stuff like sexy movies.
Right.
Porn was advertised in there.
Yep.
I mean, it was a thrill that was right there within your everyday reach. And the best part is most people probably didn't even realize that's what you were doing. It was like looking at these sort of scandalous images in the newspaper. The adults, anyway, weren't paying attention.
Right.
So there is sort of like that aspect of it with the fanzine as well. Like I've collected all of those images together and put them together in the magazine, and you can look through them on paper the way it was meant to be seen.
Exactly. People, and I think that's part of the reason why vinyl records are starting to come back, is people like the tactile sensation of holding the album in your hands, and then beyond that,
I agree,
reading the liner notes, and not in a CD format where you need a microscope to read them,
Yeah, that doesn't count.
Right, exactly. So, like I said, when I get your magazine, I just pour through it from page to page, read the articles, and then I love looking at the old ads. I mean, that's a huge passion of mine as well. And you're right, because back in the day, that was what I did too, is would get the newspaper, either if my parents got it or I'd have to go to the, local convenience store and get one. And that was my first thing, is to find the page that had the movie ads. And they even had TV listings in there. They have comics. which I don't think newspapers do any of those things, right? Or maybe they still have comics, right?
I haven't picked up a newspaper in so long I couldn't even tell you. And I'm ashamed to say so, but I'm one of those people that doesn't look at the newspaper anymore.
Yeah, same here. So, how difficult is it to put this a print fanzine together? Can you maybe walk us through the process of what you have to do without giving away any of your trade secrets?
Wow. Okay, well, it's actually a lot easier to do than I originally anticipated because when, like I said, I saw Lance's fanzine, Snack Bar Confidential, and I was like, oh, how does he put this together? But for years, I had this cheap Photoshop knockoff program called Photo Studio. It came with a scanner that I bought many, many years ago. And I used to play around with this program. I'm like, this is really kind of in depth. I mean, this has a lot of features to it. So, and there was no instruction manual on how to use it. So I just had to teach myself how to use this program. And it just grew out of that. I'm like, I could make an 8.5 by 11 image, and that would be 2 pages of a fanzine. So that was that was the base that I started with. I was like, I'm just going to put these images together and see what it looks like when you fold it into a fanzine format. And so I learned how to do the visual aspect of it that way. The difficult part was printing it and putting it together in a way that, was chronological. That took a lot of trial and error. And I got around that by creating, for every issue that I make, I create a dummy, just like a blank issue, and I write on each page. After I fold it, I go through and number all the pages, and then I plan out the layout of the issue that way. Then once you open the pages again and unfold them, you can see all the numbers, and you're like, okay, here's the part of the page I have to fit together with this part of the page, and then when the magazine is folded together, it'll all be in chronological order.
Right, that makes sense.
So it's, I can't imagine how people do it any other way. I'm sure there's probably a program out there that would do it for you, and I just don't know. But I like doing it this way now because that's the way that I've learned, and I can do it relatively quickly.
That's great. And do you have to hand staple them all yourself?
No, I have a printer.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I have a print shop that does that for me. And that's another difficult aspect of making this happen is finding a print shop that understands what you want.
Right.
Because, I admit it's kind of a strange thing probably for them to see somebody come in and ask something like this, although I'm sure they make booklets all the time. But I'm kind of specific about what I want and how I want it to look. I went with, here's the other thing too. I love magazines. I love looking at, all types of magazines, and magazines can be beautiful. They can be printed on high gloss, full color paper. I want mine to look cheap. And I've told everybody this. First of all, I want it to be cheap. I only charge $5 per issue for it, and $6 if I have to do a color cover.
Right.
Or if there's a whole lot of content in it. Sometimes I'll bump the price up to $6. But I couldn't imagine asking much more money than that. And that's the way I want it to look. Every issue that I make has the cover is printed on a different fluorescent color paper. It's almost always a black and white issue. I've only done a color cover twice so far. There's been 2 specials that had full color covers just to see how it would look. And it's, I like it, but that black and white really speaks to me. So it's cheap to do that at the printer, and to talk to them though, and sometimes they want to put it on glossy paper. I'm like, oh, here, this is. I'm like, no, I want it to have a matte finish, and I want it to feel good in your hands while you're reading it.
Nice.
So I've been lucky to find a print shop that understands that now, and they work with me. They turn these issues around really quickly. They're great. I don't know if we can say their name on your podcast. They're in Pittsburgh. They're called Copies at Carson.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Say the name again.
They're called Copies on Carson.
Excellent. We'll put I'll find their link and we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, absolutely. We should be supporting every aspect of your magazine because I think it's just a wonderful thing. And good for them for understanding your needs. Like you said, it is hard to find someone with. Back in like '91, when I was at art school, we printed our own comic book, and it was very hard to get someone that could do it the way we wanted to. And it was a similar way. We wanted it on newsprint. We ended up not getting it that way, but
What did you end up with?
we ended up with a glossy white book. It was
Mm-hmm.
totally, the images were black and white from cover to cover, but it came out great anyways. But it was funny. It was a bunch of us. We all did a short story in the book, and it was more because we were like 21-year-olds. We didn't know what we were doing, so we just went with what we could get.
It looks like I think a lot of that inspiration to make the magazine look that way comes from those Warren magazines, like
Yes.
Famous Monsters and Vampirella, and all those great, really thin paper magazines that turned brown really quickly.
Right, creepy and eerie, all those.
Yeah, that was the good stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I still pick up. I used to have a ton of Famous Monsters, and I've kind of lost them over the years for whatever reason. And so every so often, I'll be on like Facebook or eBay or something, and I'll grab an issue here and there, just because again, getting back to the tactile sensation, and like you said with your book, it's you want it to feel a certain way. There's a certain feel to it that. Not only like if we were to buy your book now, those of us who did read the older books would get that nostalgic feeling, which we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then
hopefully, yeah. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And then, and we can pass that on to the next generation to say this is how it should be. It doesn't have to be glossy. It doesn't have to be high def. It's giving you amazing stuff to begin with,
Yeah, that's not always better. The high gloss, high res, that isn't necessarily a better way. In my opinion, anyway.
Right. And just sort of like in movies, just as an analogy, I've mentioned this a few times on the show. I think it was Roger Ebert who said that stop motion effects look fake but feel real, whereas computer generated images look real but feel fake.
God bless him. Roger Ebert was a fantastic guy, and I totally agree with him.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And
Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel taught me how to appreciate movies.
Yeah.
Watching their show, sneak previews.
Yep, I remember
even though, yeah, that was life-changing for me as a film fan, because even though I didn't agree with a lot of it, they would trash movies that I loved, and I'd be like, oh, why don't they like that? And blah, blah. But I just loved watching them talk about the movies that they did like, because to me, it was very interesting. And, plus, even though they were trashing, slasher movies and horror movies, they gave them airtime,
right?
And they did get that out there, and it was there on TV for anybody to see. And I would tune in just to watch the brief clips that they would show from all the scary movies.
Oh yeah, especially on the Friday the 13th films, they would totally trash them, and it was like just so much fun.
They hated those movies so much that to see all that pearl clutching. It was great too, because I think they read a little bit too much into it. Personally, I think like they were seeing a lot that really was not there. They weren't always wrong.
Right.
I'm not saying that, but I think they were a little too histrionic sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, heck, when you get down to it, if you look at a movie like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you walk away from that movie thinking that you saw far more than you did. It's really not that gory.
Yeah, I think Roger gave that a good review when he reviewed it in the newspaper.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird.
He liked that movie.
Yeah, maybe because he recognized that fact, that a lot of it was implied.
Well, I think I remember him saying he didn't like it, but he couldn't say that it was a bad movie because it was very well made.
That's hilarious.
Because it made him feel bad, which it was supposed to.
Right, right. Can you tell us about some of the people who write articles for your fanzine?
Yeah, I've been so lucky. A lot of people, most of the people who contribute have approached me, and I'm very happy about that they saw it. One of the first people that reached out to me was Chris Poggiali, who he is a well-known film historian. He's been on a lot of bonus features for Blu-rays and DVDs talking about Times Square and the grindhouse culture. And he had his own online entity called Temple of Schlock. If you've ever looked at Temple of Schlock, that's Chris Poggiali. He reached out to me, a guy named Dustin Fallon, who has a website called Horror and Sons, reached out to me, and That's a great website, by the way. Dustin has been nominated several times for a Rondo for his website. He's the Susan Lucci of the Rondos. He's been nominated so many times, but still hasn't won. So one of these years, they're going to give it to him.
Right.
Also, some other kindred spirits for the movie ad thing, because I'm not the first person to obsess over movie ads. There are people that have done it before me. Michael Ferrari, a.k.a. Cinema Dumit, was his persona online, and he used to run newsprint ads on his Facebook page. And there was a guy named Don Diskowski who had a page called Vintage Newspaper Ads, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, Don, if I got it wrong. And Lana Revick, who has a great page called Starts Today. She writes for Drive-In Asylum also. And she also has branched out into sharing newsprint ads for novels that have come out. Because apparently, I didn't really realize that they promoted novels in the newspaper as much as they did.
Oh, wow.
But she's got her finger right on the pulse of the novels. She's just got a lot of great ideas and a great eye for an interesting ad. Her page is called Starts Today.
Wow.
And she's on Instagram as Vintage Newsprint Movie Ads.
Okay. Cool.
So look her up too.
Hello, this is Rod Barnett. I'm the host of The Bloody Pit, the podcast that examines films from across the decades. On The Bloody Pit, we have several ongoing series of shows within the show focused on specific things in genre cinema that I and my co-hosts find fascinating. There's a long-running series focused on Italian maestro Antonio Margheriti's films from the 1960s all the way up through 1990. There's an on-again, off-again series focused on 1970s science fiction films. There's an in-depth look at the Western movies that William Castle made before he struck out on his own and became the horror auteur that we know and love. A look at the classic Coffin Joe films from Brazil. And our long-term project to look at every Universal horror film made in the 1940s. That's a long project, people. It's going to take us a long time. Sprinkled in amongst those are various other episodes focused on other stranger areas of cinema, like Lucio Fulci, Dario Argento, and even some obscure British crime films from time to time. So join me and my rotating crew of co-hosts as we examine the stranger side of cinema through an exploitation lens. Except when we don't? Yeah, you never really know exactly what to expect on The Bloody Pit. So join me for The Bloody Pit.
Are you a lifelong fan of General Hospital?
Are you a new fan who wants to know more about the history of the show?
Do you enjoy talking about the show with others?
Do you find yourself yelling at the TV?
Is your self-care an hour a day in Port Charles?
If so, we invite you to join hosts
Amanda Kimmel
and Shannon Coach at the place where all the hidden conversations take place and secrets are revealed.
Meet us at Pier 54,
a General Hospital fan podcast.
Shark Bites Podcast. It's the greatest show in history. From the Dorkening Network, hosted by a nerd who's named Patsy. From movie reviews to tips on surviving the coronavirus, Shark Bites has it all. Follow us on Facebook and suggest topics at sharkbitespod@gmail.com. Available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Who's a good friend of mine. He has a website called BNS About Movies. He does a review site with his wife, Becca. But Sam writes for Drive-In Asylum and also contributes original art. So he's been with me a long time. Bradley Steele Harding, who's a filmmaker. He has a new movie coming out called 13 Tracks to Frighten Agatha Black. He's been in Drive-In Asylum a lot. J.H. Rood, who's another filmmaker that I'm familiar with. I was in one of his movies, by the way.
Oh, nice.
It's called The Abode of Mad Tales. I play a horror movie host in it.
That's awesome. Oh, good for you, man.
There's a lot of great people out there, that just sort of gravitated towards it, and I've been really fortunate.
That's amazing. That's so cool. Yeah, it's funny because I have on Facebook, I have a Retro TV Guide scans page, and I recently, probably a few months ago, it was probably around the time of the April Ghouls Drive-In, I added the name and vintage newspaper movie ads or something like that to it because I was just diving into them so deeply, and I started posting those, and I was like, oh, I feel bad for the TV Guide fans, so maybe I should alter it. So now I do both,
TV Guide is the great undiscovered country for me because I remember it so well. I read it every week. I was obsessed with the ads, and the ads were always original. But you can't find an online archive for TV Guide. You have to actually own the issue to get it.
Right. Doesn't it? Do you ever? Maybe it's just me, but I'm curious to know if you've ever thought of this in your life. If you ever had the opportunity to go back in time and talk to your younger self and give your younger self some advice. If I were to do that, I would tell myself, keep all the TV guides and cut out all the newspaper movie ads.
That's what you would tell your younger self?
That's exactly what I would tell my younger self.
That's why we're kindred spirits. I would definitely tell my younger self to save everything because one day it's going to be worth a lot of money. You know what I used to have that I threw out that I could just kick myself? I was obsessed with the movie Alien.
Yeah.
And that was like, even though I had never seen it, I didn't see it until it came on HBO because unfortunately my mom saw it in a theater. And she was one of the people, because that ad campaign for Alien didn't really tell you what the movie was about.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons it's so brilliant. So she was one of the people that went to see it opening weekend, didn't know what she was in for, and it scared the shit out of her. So she would not take me to see that movie, even though I wanted to see it so bad. But she did break down and she bought me the Alien action figure created by Kenner.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was like a foot tall.
Yeah.
It was the creature from Alien. It was wonderfully detailed. And nobody bought it because it was scary.
Yeah.
And why would you buy your child a toy of such a scary, sexualized monster?
Right.
I mean, like the head was like completely phallic.
Right.
So it was a very ill-conceived child's toy. But I did have one, and I can still remember the day I went into my closet and just started putting things in a garbage bag and throwing them away. And I threw it out. So what was I thinking? I don't know, but that thing is worth $1,000 now.
Oh, wow.
If you still have the original box,
and that's
at least $1,000.
Isn't that the one where you press the back of his head and the inner mouth would shoot out?
Yes.
Yes.
That is the very one.
Yeah, I remember that. I never had it, but I always wanted it.
It was beautiful, I can tell you. It came with a poster inside of the creature, and the head. The dome of the head came off, and there were like skull ridges underneath of it.
Oh, wow.
Which apparently was that is the design of the original creature, but you don't see it in the movie because they darkened the dome so that you couldn't see the skull.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's great. Wow. Yeah, it's just funny. I mean, there's so many toys I destroyed as a kid that I kick myself. I once destroyed a Star Wars Land of the Jawas action playset. Now, I was 19, mind you, and I worked at a comic book shop, and the very next day, I think I blew it up with firecrackers. The very next day, I'm looking at a price guide, and it was worth $200, and I almost fell out of my chair.
Well, at least it was an inspired death.
Right, yeah. The Empire came in and killed them all, so...
I had the Death Star space station, which was basically a Barbie's dream house for boys.
Yeah, yeah.
It had 3 levels and an elevator that connected them, and that was a lot of fun, and probably worth a whole bunch of money today.
Oh, yeah.
I threw it away.
That's the one that had the trash compactor that had all kinds of like little foam that was supposed to be the trash.
And that little or Loch Ness Monster looking monster that was in there.
Oh, man. My Rosebud was the Millennium Falcon. I always wanted the Millennium Falcon, and I never got it.
Me too. Oh, my God. Yeah, I wanted that so bad.
Yeah. Oh, that's so amazing.
It was expensive, though.
I know. That's why we never got it, probably.
Yeah, it was a lot of money. I understand why no adults wanted to spend that amount of money for me.
Oh, that's so amazing. And with one thing I love about getting back to your Drive-In Asylum fanzine,
Yeah.
each issue they're not just willy-nilly. It's not like you're just slapping a bunch of ads in and hoping for the best. You've got a theme for each one, which I really love.
Yeah, the collages that I put in there all have some sort of connecting theme, usually. Like one collage I did was all movies that had been released by Hallmark Releasing, which is one of my favorite companies. They put out Last House on the Left,
Oh yeah.
Don't Look in the Basement, Don't Open the Window, which was a zombie movie called Let Sleeping Corpses
Oh
Lie.
right.
They changed all the titles to these movies and made them as lurid and sensational as possible. And that's why I love them. Their ad campaigns were just beautiful. So that's a theme. And then there's, one I did showed, I picked out a whole bunch of ads that showed decapitated heads. There's always some sort of connection. People that are being choked, victims that are being held by a monster, stuff like that. It's fun. I have a lot of fun doing it.
Oh yeah. And I just got your tribute to Horror Host issue, which not only just had newspaper ads, it had quite a few TV listings, which was great. But I was surprised to see that actually some horror hosts were advertised in the newspaper. I did not know that.
Yeah, that was kind of a surprise for me too. But yeah, well, mostly the newspaper advertisements for horror hosts were the horror hosts would make appearances in local theaters a lot of times.
Oh right.
Like there was well, Vampira did. She's one of the first big horror hosts, and she was only on the air for like a year,
Right.
which is amazing. But she did a lot of in-person appearances. There was a guy out of LA called Seymour who was a horror host, and he did a lot of theatrical appearances, introducing movies at the local theaters. So, yeah, I was surprised by that as well.
Yeah. I thought that was actually I was pleasantly surprised to find that. And you get a lot of cool interviews in your magazines too. Do you do any of them yourself, or is it just the other writers?
No, I do a lot of them myself. When I started the magazine, I had a short list of my dream interviews, and I've got about half of them so far, and I didn't even think I'd get one. But I wanted to write about the movies that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
That's one of the cornerstones of why I do what I do, online, in print. I want to talk about movies because that's one of the biggest disappointments for me is there are great magazines out there, but they never talk about the stuff that I want to talk about, the movies that I want to talk about.
Right.
So I just created my own and I started doing it. And I was inspired, that aspect of it, a great author named Lee Gambin. He's an Australian guy, and he's a fantastic film historian. He's written a couple of different books. One was about eco-horror called Massacred by Mother Nature. He wrote a couple of, the term escapes, monograph, I think he wrote a couple of monographs, which is a book about a single movie. He wrote one about Cujo.
Oh wow.
And The Howling as well.
Oh nice.
And he's a very enthusiastic film author. But he reached out to me and he offered to give me, because I wasn't going to have stuff like that in it. It was just going to be a scrapbook of ads. And, every once in a while we'd have some reviews in there. And but I did have these people that I wanted to talk to, and I didn't think I could make it happen. Because I thought, how am I going to get in touch with these people? But Lee reached out to me and he was like, hey, I see you're doing, because I hyped something online about how our next issue was going to be about the movie Frogs. This was Drive-In Asylum number 4. And he reached out to me. He's like, hey, I have an interview with Joan Van Ark that you can use.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, my God, really? You'd let me run that? And he was like, yeah, it ran in Fangoria years ago, but I own the article, and I'll let you run it.
Nice.
So he inspired me a lot to do that. And he used to write on his social media all the time about the people that he was talking to. And basically, he was just like, yeah, I just reached out to them online, and that's how I got connected with these people. So I started doing it too. I started courting people that I wanted to do an interview with, and I tried to be not pushy about it.
Yeah.
But one of the first people that I wanted to reach out, she was one of the first actors that I ever thought of to do an interview with. Her name's Linda Gillen, and she was in a fabulous movie from 1972 called The Folks at Red Wolf Inn.
Oh yeah.
AKA Terror House.
Right.
And it's about a young woman who gets suckered into this sort of human trafficking scam where she's lured to this seaside resort promising a vacation, but when she gets there she starts to realize that the people who run this place are cannibals and they're luring people there like to use them as meat.
Yeah.
And I saw it on WOR's Fright Night.
Yep.
Many years ago. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. In fact, go ahead and I'll tell you afterwards.
Well, I saw that movie on Fright Night and I just fell in love right away with the movie, and nobody ever talks about it. And I thought, how awesome would it be to get to talk to Linda Gillen, who's the lead actress in this, about it. And finally, I got her to agree to it, and she was so nice. I did a nice long interview. I talked about other movies she was in, including The Magic Garden of Stanley's Sweetheart. She did some appearances, smaller roles in movies like Windows, that 1980s pseudo slasher with Elizabeth Ashley and Talia Shire. She had a lot of insight about these, lesser known movies, and I just kept going from there. I just kept reaching out. Toni Lawrence, who was in a movie called Pigs.
Yep.
She was the lead in Pigs, and she agreed to an interview. She's been in Drive-In Asylum.
Yep.
Douglas McKeon, who's the director of The Deadly Spawn.
Nice.
I had a whole issue about Messiah of Evil.
Oh wow.
The fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, it's a little obscure, but it's starting to pick up a great reputation as time goes by. I got in touch with after I talked to Linda. Linda happens to be personal friends with Mariana Hill, who was in a whole bunch of movies, including The Godfather Part 2,
oh, wow.
High Plains Drifter, with Clint Eastwood.
Yep.
But she was also in Messiah of Evil, and Linda was like, here's her phone number, call her up, she'll talk to you. And she did.
That's awesome.
She was really nice, and I was like, wow, this is easier than I thought.
Yeah.
So, it's been so exciting, that part of it.
Yeah. That's amazing. Good for you, man. That's so cool. Who are some of the dream guests that you have yet to get on the show? If you can say their names.
Oh, yeah, I can say their names. I say their names all the time. They're like mantras. Rosie Holitik, who was in Don't Look in the Basement and Horror High.
Oh, all right.
A.K.A. Twisted Brain.
Yeah.
Rosie, she's been one of my dream interviews from the very beginning because Don't Look in the Basement is one of my all-time faves.
Yeah.
But apparently, I don't want to say too much, but I think she's not all that enthusiastic about her appearances in these low-budget horror films. She's since gone on to a lot more greater things. She's had a lot of success in real estate. She's a realtor now out of Texas, somewhere in Texas. So she's a little bit reluctant, or so I've heard, to talk about this. I haven't completely written it off yet. If anyone can talk to her, it's me.
Well, there you go. Tenacity's the key, man.
So she's definitely one person that I have not been able to contact yet.
Wow. Yeah, you just got to keep at them. I find with certain guests on the show, I'll send out the inquiry to their publicist or something, and then I'll circle back a couple weeks later and say, hey, just following up. And it's actually worked out well, where they go, oh, yeah, hey, oh, sorry, we didn't get back to you, that kind of thing.
Another person that I would love to get in the magazine is, his name's Zooey Hall. He's an actor mostly seen in the early 70s. And he did a film called Poor Albert, Little Annie. And it was reissued a couple years after it debuted as I Dismember Mama.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
Which is a title that has nothing to do with the content of the film.
Right.
But Zooey Hall's performance in this is so astonishingly bleak and frightening. And I would just love to talk to him about that. There's another movie called Scream Bloody Murder.
Yep.
that came out. Now, I know the one you're thinking of that's called Scream Bloody Murder. That's the one about the guy who has a hook for a hand.
Yes.
This movie was also called Scream Bloody Murder, but it was made by a completely different crew. It came out within 6 weeks of the hook for a hand Scream Bloody Murder.
Huh.
And it was thus titled My Brother Has Bad Dreams.
Oh, weird.
And I would love to talk to anybody who was in the cast of that. The lead, unfortunately, passed away the year after the movie came out. But there were other people who are in the film that I would love to talk to. So that's just a couple people that I'm still on the hunt for.
Yeah. Yeah, good for you, man. Yeah, keep it up. You know, it just, this is another thing to tell the folks at home that you're going to get these amazing people, and you've gotten so many amazing people that they really need to read this fanzine.
Yeah. Speaking of Horror High, coming up in one of the future issues, we're going to have an interview with the lead from Horror High, Pat Carty.
Oh, nice.
Who played Vernon in Horror High. Yeah, he was sort of like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, mad scientist kid in Horror High. So that's very exciting. Pat already said that he would do it. I just have yet to call him and talk to him about it.
That's great. Oh, good for you, man. That's so cool. You know, and what I was going to say about Fright Night was I grew up in the Boston area, so just north of Boston, and when we first got cable, we would get WR and WPIX, which was Channel 9 and Channel 11 from New York. And my mother and I would stay up late on the weekends, and we'd watch Chiller on PIX and Fright Night on WOR. And recently on the show, if you get a chance, you can find it in our list of shows, whether it's on iTunes or our website or whatever. I interviewed James Arena, who wrote a whole book about Fright Night. And he goes into...
Yeah, I have that book.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. It's such a great handbook on that show, and it's like, it just brings back fond memories as well.
Well, I have to remember that you did that and go listen to it. I wasn't aware.
Yeah, he was really good on that. I'm trying to get him back on the show to talk about movies, but he's got such a crazy schedule. But, you know, it's funny, too. One thing I love is when I'm doing the research and I'm looking at, let's say, 1977, of course, that's the year of Star Wars, and I'm looking at these newspaper ads in my research, and I'm seeing all these movies, and I'm going, yeah, I saw that. And, you know, I can name all the ones I saw in the theater, mainly with my parents. But then I see ones that I didn't recognize. I'm like, wait a minute. Why didn't I see that movie? I would have loved that movie. What the heck is going on here? You know? And I think half the time, some of them are, as you mentioned earlier, they're retitled. Movie gets issued, doesn't do well, so they change the title, put it back out, make it sound more lurid. But it's an amazing thing to find movies that I hadn't seen before, that I didn't even hear of. Do you find that too?
Yeah, that happens to me all the time, and it's very exciting because, you know, we always think we know everything about movies. At least, you know, I do. And I'm constantly proving myself wrong by finding all this fabulous stuff that was out there and I just wasn't aware of. So, I love doing that. And like you said, sometimes the movies were reissued under different titles, and that's very exciting for me too, because that's a recurring column, if you want to call it, in Drive-In Asylum. I don't write anything; it's just a collage, but I like to group together collages of movies that are, you know, ads for movies that are alternate titles.
Right.
And it's called AK, also known as.
Yep.
And I've done it in maybe like 7 or 8 issues so far. We have 22 issues. We're about to do our 22nd issue, by the way. And we have 5 specials so far. So we're coming up on 27 total issues.
Wow. And it's quarterly, right?
Technically, we're a quarterly publication, yes. I've gotten a little off my schedule with the pandemic. And also because we also started doing a weekly webcast on Facebook. It's a live webcast every Saturday night called the Drive-In Asylum Double Feature. So I've sort of been teaching myself video production, and I just totally fell down the rabbit hole with doing video production when we started doing the weekly show. So I fell behind in my magazine production, but we're still going to have 4 quarterly issues this year and 2 specials.
Nice.
So I just got my months off a little bit.
And so,
but
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so
I was saying something, but I can't remember what it was.
Well,
I was talking about. I know what it was. I was talking about movies that have alternate titles.
Oh, yes, yes.
That's one of the big thrills of doing what I do for me, because once in a while I'll find an ad for a movie and I'll be like, what the heck is this movie? And I found one not too long ago for this movie called After Elizabeth Died. And I was like, what the heck is this movie? And then I looked and saw who the stars were, and it was Joseph Cotton and Elke Summer.
Oh.
So you know what movie that is?
Yeah. My brain's not working right now. Refresh me.
Baron Blood.
That's right. Baron Blood.
Of all things, I guess, and it dawned on me. I was like, oh, they must have come up with this alternate ad campaign, because one thing that a lot of people might not realize is in the early 70s, in the 60s, and even the early 70s, movies started to come out with the word blood in the title.
Right.
But some newspapers wouldn't print the ads for that. Like, they would either blot out the word blood or they would change it. So my best explanation for this is that, the company, it was American International Pictures that put out Baron Blood. They must have come up with an alternate ad campaign for it that didn't have the word blood in the title for squeamish newspapers.
That's great. One of my favorites is it was the first of the Jess Franco quadrilogy. There it was the about the Knights Templars. It's driving me crazy now.
The Blind Dead.
The Blind Dead, and they released.
Yeah, that was Armando de Osorio.
Armando de Osorio. I'm sorry.
Franco.
Yeah. And they released it here. I think they re-released it, and it had this alternate opening where, because they changed the title to "Escape from Planet Ape."
Yeah, Revenge from Planet Ape.
Revenge from Planet Ape. That's right.
That is a golden moment of cinema, as far as I'm concerned.
Which is great, because you can find that alternate opening on YouTube, and it totally takes the premise and throws it out the window and makes it this completely bizarro premise about, like a Planet of the Apes ripoff, basically. Only because I guess the ad guys looked at the Blind Dead and thought they looked like apes. So I don't know. I can't explain it.
Yeah. That is opportunism at its finest, and I've actually found a whole bunch of ads for Revenge from Planet Ape. I'm always excited when I see one.
Yeah.
It was mostly in the Southwest, like Texas. Texas was a great place for all of these movies. Movies that barely got a theatrical release, they were playing in Texas somewhere. I'm telling you, like up until the 80s, the early 80s. There were a lot of movies that appeared to be direct to video in the later 80s, but you can find them on screens in Texas. And, even movies that just barely got a theatrical release. Somewhere in Texas, there was a drive-in that had it. So I'm always scouring the Texas newspapers for these.
It's funny that you say that, because I discovered the same thing, and I found El Paso is like a hotbed for every single one of these movies that nobody's ever heard of.
It's golden.
Yeah. Like, even a lot of the martial arts films, which, I do another show where we talk about movies from the Shaw Brothers and spaghetti westerns, and I try looking up ads for those, and they say, oh, well, this one was really popular over here, and I only find it in Texas. I don't find it anywhere else in the country.
Yeah. If you're an ad hunter, go out there and look in the papers for anywhere in Texas, but El Paso especially, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yep.
And also anywhere in Connecticut. Look in New England, because in New England, a lot of those obscure films came out. That was where Hallmark Releasing was based, actually.
Oh.
And Hallmark Releasing, they were a subdivision of American International Pictures.
Okay.
And I think they were based out of Boston, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So in the Boston, Hartford, Connecticut area, you'll see a lot of these movies that were carried by Hallmark. But what they like to do is they like to do a test run in the local drive-ins of a property they had just picked up, and they would just choose a title for it and see if people went to see it under this title. And if they didn't, they'd put it out in another theater under another title.
Wow.
Don't Look in the Basement was one of their movies, and before they called it Don't Look in the Basement, the director, S.F. Brownrigg, called it The Forgotten. And it ran in Texas as The Forgotten, and a couple other places in the United States as The Forgotten. Then Hallmark picked it up, put it out, and the first title that they chose for it was, or one of the first titles that they chose for it was Death Ward Number 13.
Huh. That's funny.
Death Ward number 13. And they also tried another title called The Snake Pit.
Okay.
And Beyond Help.
Wow.
Was another one.
Beyond Help.
And this was all in the New England area. And I love finding those ads as well. And then they decided on Don't Look in the Basement. That title stuck, and that's what they went with.
Right. I've been having trouble trying to find the Boston Globe ads. I think I'm going to have to just either knuckle down and get a subscription to like one of the other ones, the bigger newspaper archives, and just get into the Boston Globe ads. You know, because that's the question actually I had for you is what I like to do, especially like with the TV Guide and then moving into newspapers, is I like to go back and find movies or TV shows that I saw at the time and find the ads for them, whether it was in the theater or on TV. Do you do the same thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's very personal to do this kind of stuff. A lot of it springs from your own experience, really. So you just go and you look for them. Oh, I remember watching TV on this night. Like, I can remember, this is a really generic one, but I remember the first time they showed the movie Halloween on television.
Oh, yeah.
And that was October 30th, 1981.
Yeah.
And that was also the same night that Halloween 2 debuted theatrically. But, I always go to whatever newspaper it is on that night. I'll go and see if they advertised Halloween 2 or Halloween, the TV premiere in the newspaper.
Right.
Also, like staying up late and watching Fright Night. I've gone back and I've traced, that's what date that was that I watched this movie.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you grew up in the New York area?
No, Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, that's right. You said that. And so, you were able to get that on cable, I assume?
Yeah, it was one of the early super stations that we got was WOR from New York. We also got Channel 43 WUAB out of Cleveland.
Oh, wow.
And eventually we got TBS, Ted Turner's station out of Atlanta.
Right. We haven't had those channels here in years. And I think for us in the Boston area, the WOR and PIX got pulled because of Red Sox games. And so they would always have blackouts because if they're playing the Yankees or the Mets, it was like, well, there's no point, I guess. So, I don't really follow sports, but I think ultimately they had such similar programming. And then when the networks came out, like the UPN and the WB and all them, they just... They pulled them because it's like, well, why have two WB channels or stations in Boston,
Yeah, I am not a sports fan, and one of the reasons is because it was always preempting some shit I wanted to watch on TV.
I used to stay up late watching, I would have to sit through whatever stupid baseball game was on, which I hated, and then I think it was on PIX, and then there was the independent network news, and then finally they'd play Star Trek. And so I would be up at 1 a.m. My mother's like, "Are you still awake?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm waiting for Star Trek. I have to sit through all this stupid crap."
Yeah, it was a bummer.
So tell us a little bit more about your online movie watching parties that you have going on. That's under Groovy Doom, right?
Yeah, if you go to Facebook on the Groovy Doom page, I chose that page to do the weekly screenings because I do have a page for Drive-In Asylum, but it doesn't have as many followers. And I thought, well, I'm going to put the live broadcast on the page that has more followers, naturally.
Right.
So, but some people have been a little confused by that, so I apologize. Our live broadcast is on the Groovy Doom page. It's every Saturday night. Sam Panico and I are the regular hosts, and we also occasionally have a third host. Another person that writes for Drive-In Asylum is Gigi Graham. She's a fantastic film journalist. She has her own website called midnightmoviemonster.com. I encourage everyone to go read her stuff. She's an incredibly insightful author, very witty, very economical in the way that she talks about. She's not long-winded. She gets right to the point, and she's right on it. She hosted the show with us last night, and it was very exciting. For us anyway, because we love her.
That's awesome.
But so Gigi Graham is hosted with us. Lana Revick is going to be on the show next Saturday night. I think that's the 11th, July 11th.
Yes. Sunday's the 11th.
Okay, so the 10th. Yeah. July 10th, Lana Revick will be on the show. Bradley's been on the show. I mentioned him. Dustin's been on the show. J.H. Rude has been on the show. So, folks associated with Drive-In Asylum mostly have done it. Another thing we did is we did an afternoon screening of the folks at Red Wolf Inn, and Linda Gillen came on the show, and she did the show with us, which was exciting to have an actor from the film.
That's great.
Right there with us to talk to, and it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. And do you have to get the rights to the movies?
No, because we don't actually screen the movie. What happens is that's a really serious legal entanglement to screen the movie and to encourage people to watch it. And I researched this. Even if you're not charging people money for watching the film, you still might owe somebody money for public performance rights. So instead, we chose to we pick movies that you can stream online for free.
Okay.
So what we do is we go on before the movie. We talk for anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour. So it's like podcast length.
Right.
And then we have regular segments. I do an ad gallery for each movie that we have on, like a video ad gallery. We play that and talk over it. We're looking at newsprint ads because I can't stray too far from that. It's my passion. And Sam comes up with a cocktail for every beverage. So there's a cocktail segment. We talk about the making of the film. Then we have a countdown. We get everybody, basically on the same page. At the end of the countdown, we click start and sign off. And then after the movie's over, we come back. We talk about that one. There's a middle segment, and then we close it down before the movie starts. Come back after the second movie and do a third segment.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, it skirts the legal rights issue.
That's perfect. That is so cool.
Other people have gotten around it. There's a fabulous horror host named Uncle Spooky.
Oh yeah,
it's Uncle with a K in the middle. He's in the horror host issue, by the way.
Yeah.
Did you receive that yet?
I did. I got it the other day. I loved it.
Oh, perfect. Uncle Spooky's been on the show once or twice, and he has a great weekly program. He does 2 movies every week on Tuesdays and Fridays. I don't know how he does it, but his show is a Zoom meeting, and you can do that in a Zoom meeting because that's private.
Oh, okay.
You have to have an invitation to it, so that makes it a private meeting, and you don't owe anybody any public performance rights for that. So he actually does screen the movie. So that's another way you could get it. Or you could only show public domain films, but everybody shows public domain films. So,
right.
Why do that?
Yeah. That's great. Oh, man. You got a lot going on. That's so cool.
There's another thing I wanted to say before we move on. Yeah. We were talking about watching movies on Fright Night and scouring the TV guide.
Mm-hmm.
This is a way that the consumption of films has changed. And in my opinion, it's not as good as it used to be. I know every old person says that. But the fact is, this is how we learned about a lot of these movies, because it wasn't always something that you, quote unquote, wanted to watch that was on these weekly programs. But you got in the habit of watching a horror movie on Saturday nights, and usually no matter what the movie was, I would tune in and watch it. And that exposed me to a lot of things that I ordinarily wouldn't have approached on my own.
Yeah.
And so like somebody else picked that programming out, and that is completely gone. It's not completely gone. I retract that statement. You have to choose to have your movies curated for you now.
Right.
By watching a show like Joe Bob's show. I've only started to really see this in action when we started doing our show, because a lot of people that watch it, they're like, I never saw any of these movies before. And that makes me really happy, because that was my experience when I was younger. And it was every week that this movie slot was on. One of them was Ghost Host. He was a horror host out of Baltimore, and he was, syndicated to Pittsburgh. Movies like or slots like Fright Night and Ghost Host. Chiller Theater was a local Pittsburgh one that was just fabulous. I watched a lot of these movies, and it was the first time I'd ever seen them. And now that experience, it's harder to get that, because everything is immediate now. Like, you don't have to wait till a certain time of the day to watch the movie.
Right.
You can watch it. It's on demand, basically. And you don't have to, there's no ceremony from that part anymore. that was part of the fun, wasn't
Oh,
it? Like
yeah.
waiting for this to come on.
Yeah, it's so true. And like in Boston, we had something called Creature Double Feature, which was, I think there was one like that in Philadelphia too. It was the same title. Um, and it was on a Saturday afternoon, and all we had was a voiceover. We didn't actually have a host. But people still, to this day, fondly remember that. When I worked at a cable station a few years back, I created a show called Monster Movie Matinee, and I did it in the spirit of Creature Double Feature. And there were so many people that would stop me on the street. They're like, "Oh my God, do you do that Creature Feature show?" Like, yeah. They're like, "Oh, I when my nephew comes over every Saturday, we sit down and we watch it, and we love it. You know, it's just like Creature Double Feature." And you don't have that experience anymore. And more to the point, you know, back in the day too, to build on what you had already said, if you missed something, you missed it. There was no DVR, there was no tapes, DVDs, whatever. It was, if you would have to find
you
it.
had to wait till the next time it was on. Yeah.
And the problem I see with the TV watching today is, all right, yeah, it's great that pretty much every movie now is at our fingertips. We can get it on whatever physical media or streaming service. But where do the kids go? Where do they begin? They don't even know. Like you said, you know, people telling you, "Oh, I never even heard of those movies before." Well, we need to be able to inform them about these things. They don't know where to start. You know, we had guides. We had not only the TV Guide, literally, but we had Famous Monsters and other magazines to tantalize us and go, oh, I read about that in the magazine. I want to see that, you know, or I like that actor. They don't have that anymore.
Yeah, because a lot of these horror host slots, and even the ones that didn't have a host, it was just a slot on TV.
Right.
You know, they weren't necessarily choosing these movies because the movies came to them in a package, a syndicated package. So, but still. That was still it was somewhat random, but it was still being curated for us somehow. And you know, there were these movies that we had never heard of before that they were showing us. So yeah, it was a much different experience, and it was a little more exciting, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And those packages too introduced us to like all kinds of things, like the AIP films, but also the Universal classics. Which, you know, you know, these kids have to see these movies. In fact, we're doing a series on the show about getting people into horror movies, and that's where we started, was with the Universal monster films, because it's the best way to start, especially if they're even younger. You know, it's black and white. They're kind of tame by today's standards. They're still scary, though, on a certain level. You know, when I was a kid, those were terrifying.
Yeah. They really were. You know, all it had to be was dark and spooky and lightning, and then there's a weird face in the darkness, and that was scary.
It's so true.
And I wonder about that. Like, are younger kids today watching the 1931 Dracula or Frankenstein? Like, are they interested in these movies at all? And I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I can tell you that my two kids did, and now my grandson does, and he's 4, and he loves them. So it's really up to the people. If you've got, you know, a niece, a nephew, a you know, cousin, whatever, you really got to just sit them down and just explain to them, first of all, why there's no color in the film if they ask you, you know, which is, it's funny to think about. Because to us, if I see something...
That's a big idea to get used to for them.
You know, like my grandson's 4, he's used to it. So if I'm watching something in black and white, he never questions it. And, you know, that's the thing, is we just really got to keep this stuff in the pop culture, keep it relevant, and expose them to it. And it's like you can enjoy your modern films, but you got to understand where these movies came from. It's like music, you know, you got to understand the Beatles in order to appreciate some modern music, you know. Same thing with the horror movies. You got to understand the RKOs and the Universals and the, you know, all, what's his name, that did the cat people and all that. You've just got to...
Val Lewton.
Val Lewton. I couldn't think of the name.
The producer of Val Lewton.
Yeah. You know, you've got to... you know, I mean, when we were kids, you and I, every year, you were guaranteed a movie with at least one of the 3, Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, and Christopher Lee. And that would come out in the year. And chances are all 3 of them had a movie that would come out in the year. But we don't have that anymore.
Absolutely.
I interviewed this guy, Bill Oberst Jr., who's an actor, and he's basically considered a modern horror star, and he loves that title, and he embraces that title because there aren't many around anymore that do that, you know?
Yeah. You know, I guess a lot of the people that work with Rob Zombie could be considered, because he was in Three from Hell, Bill Oberst
That's right.
Jr.
Yep.
It made me think of, like, Sid Haig.
Yep.
But even those folks, a lot of it, the reason that they're in these movies is nostalgia for movies that they did before. I don't think there are very many actors who are now making a name for themselves as horror actors in modern horror films. Are there?
Well, I mean, they're getting old, but you got Robert Englund, you got Lance Henriksen, but they're getting up there in years. We need a new crop of actors that have the chops to do it and can embrace it, not be afraid of being typecast. If you're a good actor, you're a good actor. It didn't matter. Vincent Price could do anything. That's
the truth, yeah. And he gave everything that he had to all of those roles, even though a lot of actors would have just been like, oh, it's a horror movie.
Right.
He approached it from he did everything with a very Shakespearean dedication. And that's what made it so great, of course.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I love that he wasn't like that. I love that Vincent Price wasn't like that in real life. Right. That he was like this guy that liked to cook and had all this appreciation for art.
Right.
He was not a creepy guy.
He wasn't really the Witchfinder General,
Sadly, no.
So what are some of your favorite cult grindhouse horror movies?
Oh, wow. Well, I already mentioned Don't Look in the Basement, Terror House. Horror High was a huge one. That was one that I watched on TV all the time. It was called Twisted Brain.
Oh, yeah.
On TV. And that, these were the movies that scarred me as a child. The great website, kindertrauma.com. Go out and look for it. It's my friends Lance and John run that site. And, there were these moments in movies that just scarred us. And that was sort of where I was coming from with these horror and grindhouse films, because they were the ones that really went for the lurid stuff. The Universal monsters were, like I said, the black and white, shadowy, sort of scary monster movies. But the grindhouse films showed you things like a bloody head.
Yeah.
And, the exploitation films wanted to show you severed limbs. And Horror High had this horrifying moment where a character's face was shoved into a barrel of acid and pulled back out, and it was melting. And I was like scarred by that. I still can't believe they showed that on TV. And they show a dead cat in a puddle of blood.
Oh, wow.
Which to a child, even to an adult, the death of an animal is traumatic. But to a child, it was like, oh my God.
Right.
How could this happen? Another important one for me was Frogs.
Yep.
Which is, we just watched that last night on the program with Gigi Graham. Frogs was crucial to me because that was the first time that I saw a character in a movie die on screen.
Oh,
in a horrible way.
Yeah.
There was a woman that gets attacked by all these animals in a bog, and one of the things that happens to her, she's bitten by a rattlesnake. And, rather unrealistically, she's dead in about 5 seconds after she's bitten by the snake. But somehow her corpse turns blue before your very eyes. Right. And I was like, oh, my God, what happened to her?
Yeah.
And whoever I was watching the movie with was like, well, she's dead now. Like, the snake bit her and she died. And I was just traumatized by that. Something in such a PG movie as Frogs,
Right.
But so those were some biggies. Since then, I've gotten a little more bad taste, and I really delved into the background of S.F. Brownrigg, the director who made Don't Look in the Basement. There were 3 other movies that don't get as much attention as Don't Look in the Basement. One's called Don't Open the Door, Keep My Grave Open, and Scum of the Earth, a.k.a. Poor White Trash Part 2.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Those... I love all 4 of his horror movies. He made one other movie, and it was like a teen sex comedy from the 80s that I have not seen.
Yeah.
Those are some examples. And also, I just got introduced recently to this fabulous, and this is like ultra low budget filmmaking. It's called Massage Parlor Murders.
Oh, yeah.
And have you heard of that one?
Yeah, I have. Was that
Sandra Peabody from... Huh?
I was going to ask you, was that Graydon Clark?
No, it's not Graydon Clark's. But Sandra Peabody from Last House on the Left is in it.
Okay.
She's Mary from Last House on the... Or no, wait, was she Phyllis? one of the two.
Okay.
Yeah, Sandra Peabody was Mary in Last House on the Left. She's in Massage Parlor Murders also.
Okay.
And it's just this like really ultra low budget film, sort of like a Doris Wishman type movie, where looks like it was just shot on short ends and it pasted together with this dubbed in soundtrack in a lot of places. But it's fabulous because it was shot in New York in the early 70s, and there's so much footage of like Times Square and just different areas of New York. It's almost like a travelogue.
Yeah.
It's this time capsule.
Exactly.
And I'm really into it for that reason.
I was going to use that term too. I love watching a lot of these old grindhouse movies, especially when they're set in New York, because they are time capsules. You know, you get to this, and because of the gritty filmmaking, it really gives that authentic feel to it, like you're almost there.
Yeah, it's exciting. You know, it's easy to just get lost in that kind of a footage, even though at the time that was probably in really poor taste, because who wanted to go to the movies and see footage of, you know, people on the streets of New York at that time?
Right.
They might have wanted their money back after they went to see something like that.
That's awesome.
And speaking of movies that were shot on short ends, The Child from 1977 was another obscure film that I came to. I think I came to know that in the 90s. I hunted it down on a bootleg VHS. The Child, if you're not familiar with it, is about a little girl she's telekinetic, but nobody knows. And also, her mother has just passed away, and she's obsessed with the fact that her mother died. She blames all the people around her for her mother's death. So what she does is she animates zombies from the local cemetery to go out and murder all these people that she's angry at. And the action of The Child takes place where a young woman comes to their house to be her new nanny because her mother's gone now, and her father hires this young woman to be her governess, I guess. And, chaos ensues.
That's great.
But it's this gorgeous, ultra low budget movie that sounds like, the audio sounds like it was just dubbed in from a Halloween record from the 1970s. It's like really, really low budget.
That's great.
So probably, you have to have a certain kind of acquired taste for a cheap movie like this.
Yeah.
But it's really phantasmagorical, and I mean that in a sincere way. It's like a nightmare captured on film, and that's the best way to describe that movie. That's one of my favorite grindhouse, cheapo, bizarro movies.
Yeah, I got to check that one out. I've not heard of that. I was watching Track of the Moon Beast the other day, and it's just it's just one of those movies that it fills that need for the cheap grindhouse kind of thing.
Track of the Moon Beast is one of my favorite movies in this genre, this imaginary genre I have called the furniture movie.
Oh, interesting.
It's movies that I like because I love the furniture in it.
Oh, awesome.
Track of the Moon Beast is one of those movies.
That's awesome.
Ega is another one. If you've ever seen
yes.
Ega.
Oh, yeah.
That's a furniture movie. Everything in it is just gorgeous.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny, on a bit of a tangent here. Have you watched any of the Conjuring films?
I think I saw the first one.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not really all that interested in them.
Well, it just has to relate. It relates to furniture, and I think it's in The Conjuring 2. We have the two main characters back from the first one, because then there were a bunch of ones in between that were like prequels or whatever. But anyways, the two main characters are in their house in the 70s, and that whole interior is so 70s and so beautiful. You know, I said to my wife, I'm like, when we get a house someday, that's what our interior is going to look like. We're just going to have it remodeled.
Yes. I can respect that. That might be a reason to watch The Conjuring, too.
Yeah.
I can't think of too many other reasons to watch it. I'm very cynical about modern films. Not that there aren't good movies still being made, and I still watch movies that are new. But, the Warrens are in a class of their own. They were sort of like the televangelists of the paranormal world.
Yeah.
They were like, you have this you have this imaginary thing that you have going on in your house, and we're going to come and tell you that this imaginary thing is real, and we're going to help you solve this imaginary problem that you have. and then you're going to pay us for it, or you're going to give us recognition for it. And we're going to be recognized as experts on it. And years later, they'll make movies about us and turn us into folk heroes.
Hey, I used to read. My grandmother she always had the Inquirer, so I would read all about the Warrens, right through the 70s, and I'm like, oh, where are they today? Oh, they're in Connecticut now, and they're fighting a demon.
It's like, they were involved in the Amityville horror, weren't they?
They investigated the Amityville house, I believe, after the Lutzes left.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it's kind of like that. Like, you can't tell anyone that the Amityville horror isn't real, even though the people that perpetrated it have admitted that it wasn't real. At least they recanted it once they realized that nobody wanted to hear that it wasn't real.
Yeah.
And that it was sort of like a gold mine for them now. I don't think they fully understood the potential for the Amityville horror story. But, of course, that was created by the Lutzes and their lawyer because they were underwater in their mortgage. And, they didn't know how they were going to pay for this house that they couldn't afford. And the lawyer was like, well, we'll have somebody write a book about how the house is haunted. And they came up with all that stuff that was in Jay Anson's book.
Yeah.
But, it took on such a life of its own that now you can't talk people out of it. Now they're like, oh, no, it's real.
Right.
Because I went in that house and I felt those vibrations and everything. I'm like, how could you possibly have investigated this when the people who told this story in the first place admitted that they made it up? So that's what's fascinating about the Warrens.
Well, yeah, and it's funny, just about Amityville, I wanted to mention, when I was a kid, I think it was in 1983, my parents and I went to Long Island, and one of the things we were going to do was find the Amityville house, and so we did.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't get down the actual street it was on because there was some kind of block party, so we went across the river, and we saw it, and we took pictures of it, and my mother still has the pictures, and the funny thing about it, because at the time we still really believed it was haunted, when you look at the photograph, the house itself is out of focus, but all the houses on either side of it are clearly in focus, and the boathouse is gray, but it gives off a white reflection in the water. And say what you want about it, I just I always thought that was really odd and couldn't really explain why. I mean, you could chalk it up to their shitty film cameras from the 80s, but
the owners probably were using some kind of technology to do that, because that was one of the worst things about that house after the story came out. Anybody who owned it would leave, not because it was haunted, but because they couldn't stand all those gawkers that would come and take pictures and park in front of their house. And there were people walking onto their property to go take pictures in front of the Amityville house, and it infuriated the people that owned it.
That's funny.
But I have visited it. I drove down the street and I parked in front of it and looked for a little bit. I tried not to be too intrusive. They changed it. They changed a lot of it. In fact, those creepy windows that are in what we perceive to be the front of the house is actually the back of the house that faces the river.
Right.
The thing with the weird windows that look like eyes.
Yes, yeah.
That faced the river. So you probably got a blurry picture of that.
Yeah.
Did you?
Exactly, yeah. It's
the front of the house that faces the street. It just looks like any other house.
But whenever I see a house that has those windows, I'm always like, oh, Amityville windows. I get creeped out.
Yeah. It's forever ruined, right?
Yeah. Oh, my God.
You think that there's going to be pig eyes looking at you.
Yeah, Jody, no.
Jody.
Oh, my God. Well, Bill, it's been awesome having you on the show. I did have one last question. Have you considered maybe someday compiling all your issues into like a large book or a trade paperback of some kind?
Yeah, that has been a long-standing project of mine. I just don't have the time to do it right now. That's the only reason I haven't done it yet,
right.
Is because I had all these other projects going on. I have the weekly show. I've been working with Scream Factory and Severin Films. I've done a couple ad galleries for a few of their releases, video galleries of newsprint ads for the movies that are on the discs that they're creating. They did the Friday the 13th box set.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Recently.
Yeah.
And I'm in the bonus features. It's the very last bonus feature. At the very end of the very last disc, you can go and see my handiwork.
That's awesome.
And there is another release coming out this year, which I'm not allowed to talk about yet.
Okay.
And I'm not allowed to say what it is, but it's a film series that they're reissuing, and I did the ad galleries for this too. It's very high profile.
Ooh.
That's all I'll say.
Excellent.
And also Severin Films has a movie coming out too that I did an ad gallery for. That was the reason that they asked me was because the movie was on the cover of Drive-In Asylum.
Oh, wow.
And we did an interview with one of the actors, and it's a relatively obscure film from 1979. I don't think I'm supposed to say the title either.
Okay.
So I won't. But that was interesting, you know, that like now other people are starting to recognize the value of having, and not that people didn't in the past,
right?
You know, but now it's becoming a little more high profile to examine the newsprint images and to, you know, they are beautiful in certain cases, lurid in others. They're funny, they're, you know, shrewd,
yeah,
very sensational. There are a lot of things. It's fun to look at them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Can you once again give us your where people can find you online?
Yeah, on Facebook, the main page is Groovy Doom, and it's also there's a page for Drive-In Asylum as well on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as Groovy Doom. It's Groovy_. Wait. I'm on Instagram, and it's Groovy_Doom on Insta. I'm on Twitter, but nothing ever happens on Twitter. I can't get arrested on Twitter. And also I have a blog called Groovy Doom. It's at groovydoom.blogspot.com. I hardly ever update it, but you know, every once in a while I get the urge to write in depth about a film, and that's where I'll post it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Bill, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I should also say that you can purchase Drive-In Asylum on Etsy.
Oh, yes.
The Etsy shop is also called Groovy Doom. I'm sure if you go on Etsy and just enter Drive-In Asylum, it'll come up. Or if you're in the New York area, you can purchase it at Forbidden Planet. There's also a place in at the New York PA border called Phantasm Comics. They carry Drive-In Asylum in person as well. So those are all places that you can go and buy it. If you happen to be listening in the UK, there's an online store called Strange Vice, and they also carry Drive-In Asylum, and you can order it directly from them, and then you don't have to pay high shipping costs from the US to the UK. That's great.
That's great. And do you offer subscriptions or no? Just buy them direct?
It's just on an issue by issue basis right now.
Okay.
I've considered doing subscriptions, but I think for my own sanity, you know, just individual purchases is the way I have to go for now.
Right, right. Well, they're so awesome. I love it. Thank you so much again for coming on the show. And you know, if you want, I'd love to have you on again in the future. You can talk movies with us, talk about, you know, your upcoming releases and more of what's going on with Drive-In Asylum.
I would love to come back and talk to you. It's been a great time, and thank you for asking me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Well, we hope you enjoyed my interview with Bill Van Ryn. Please check out his Drive-In Asylum fanzine as well as his Groovy Doom Facebook page. Remember, you can send your feedback to thenisnow42@gmail.com. You can also join in the conversation at our Facebook Then Is Now podcast group. Then Is Now podcast is a proud member of the Dorkening Podcast Network, so please be sure to check out the other great shows there at thedorkening.com. You can also visit our website at havenpodcasts.com, where you'll find our sister show, The East Meets the West, in which we discuss Shaw Brothers films and spaghetti western movies. And Then Is Now is on YouTube, so visit our YouTube page at youtube.com/user/UncleDeath1 to get the latest videos as well as other fun videos. Please subscribe to our YouTube page and also share the video versions of our podcast with your friends and get them to subscribe as well. Don't forget to go wherever you download your podcast from and leave us a great review so that more listeners can find us. You can find us on all the podcasting apps, especially the big three, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Class dismissed.
Is Now podcast is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. Sounds, music, and clips played during this podcast are the property of their copyright holders. All original content is copyright Jupiter Media.
For more shows like the one you just heard, check out the Dorkening Podcast Network at thedorkening.com.